And good evening once again. Today is November 23rd, 2022, and this is recording number 445. 445. It's entitled Defining the Principle. Those who were with me last week, if you recall, we had a principle that pretty much was challenging, saying, are you really up to living by spiritual principles? And the reason that I did it was because most of my writings are basically challenges to me. And if I write them down, it's like they're taking on a challenging nature to say, Kenny, are you really, really willing to give up patching this life out here or trying to get the good parts of life? Are you really up to living by spiritual principles? And one of the reasons I came to that was a lot of people are not willing to live by the principle. And one place I remember reading said, be careful how you consider to live by spiritual principles, because you may not know exactly what is required of you. And I will say that when I first read it, it was like, I don't care. I want it. And then as I got further and further, I began to see some of the things that were required to let go of, or some of the things that were required to take a different perspective on, and how other people may react to that and how you yourself may react. So that's what purposed to me to do. Are you really, really up to living by spiritual principles? Living by principles and not getting off the rail. But today's subject matter is defining the principle somewhat, defining it. And to define this principle, it has come to me that it is that strangers are meeting with a desire to understand and know each other better. One wanting security and peace. The other wanting to give just that. Now, if your imagination is now forming those pictures as it always does, I am the one seemingly looking for security and peace, and God is the one who wants to give it to me. But in the beginning of this journey, we come together as somewhat strangers, not knowing exactly what to do to please this giver, and not knowing that the giver already knows everything about us and is willing to give, and all it requires of us is a circumcised heart, a willingness to accept what is being offered. It will take much trust and givingness that this relationship be made unbreakable. Now, in the true sense, this relationship is already unbreakable. As you will hear in the forthcoming sermons that I bring forth, this relationship was formed with Jesus Christ, with God, before the foundation of the world. And everything that exists comes from that unbreakable relationship. Now, in the beginning, we don't know that because we've been taught that we severed a relationship, or someone severed it for us, and we must pay to some amount of generation to get back into good graces. But as we travel the path, we find that God is the principle of life. And this principle of life wants to give us all, because the principle is life itself. And it is living as that which we call ourselves. And for us to unite with it would require a surrender a surrender of such magnitude that we would be overwhelmed with a love unimaginable at this time, and yet so fulfilling. You see, the seeker wants all that the principal has to offer, and the principal stands ready to give all. The principal will withhold no part of its possessions. It willingly gives as much as understanding can accept. It willingly gives as much as understanding can accept. Now, I repeated that because on the classes, you'll notice we're constantly saying, don't try to understand this. Don't try to understand this, because trying to understand with what we call our human mind it sets up an obstacle. What is the obstacle? It sets up a time frame by which we are scrolling over and scrolling over and scrolling over until we can come to a place where we go, oh, yeah. Oh, okay, I can accept that. And look at the time, if there is such a thing that we want to look at the time that's lost there, because we're trying to understand. When Jesus came and simply said, take no thought, but on the other side he said, learn of me, bring forth fruitage. So in essence, to define the principle, we should just start moving in the direction of doing the things with a heart so located in God or fashioned on God that we are taking no thought, and then we come to that place where, but what about issues? What about the problems? What about, yeah, that's right. What about them? Time comes in again, because what do? We stop, and we try to pray, to beg, to get help, to try to stop things that we know we actually have no control over. And one of the horrible things is when you actually contemplate getting prayer warriors together and we're going to bombard heaven. Wow. How ridiculous. We're going to get a group of people down here, and in the multitude of numbers, we're going to, of all people, we're going to bombard God to do something. Wow. When he says, when you give your heart to me, one shall put 1,000 to flight, and two shall put 10,000 to flight. And I'm quickly reminded of the story of, I think, of Elisha. And it says he prayed. Now, I may have the name wrong, Elisha or Elijah, but one of them prayed, and it did not rain for 3 years. And then upon his prayer, it immediately brought forth a cloud and began to rain. One. And yet we are trying to define the principle here by putting prayer warriors together, and usually you know the end result. We usually end up with failed prayer. When these two seeming strangers, the seeker and the giver, when they actually stand facing one another, another miracle occurs. If the seeker can recognize it, the reality of just standing and facing one another envelops them as described in 2 Corinthians 3:18. What is that? As looking in an open mirror and beholding the glory. The seeker is looking into the face of God and beholding his glory, and God is looking into the face of the seeker, declaring his glory. Both are absorbed into one. There is now nothing that stands hindering, and there is nothing that has need of understanding. Trust is established. No longer is there a need for seeking, asking, for all things are clearly seen and made visible. What are the all things that are clearly seen? The seeker sees the glory of the Lord, and the Lord declares his glory in the seeker. Can you see now the singleness of purpose, the singleness of vision? This is why one that has become one with any principle becomes the visible personification of all that the principle has to offer. I'm going to repeat that. Any person that becomes one with any principle becomes the visible personification of all that the principle has to offer. The principle of electricity, mathematics, physics, gravity, if studied properly, you'll notice it never, ever withholds anything from the seeker. It is the principle's objective to make itself plain to whosoever will humble themselves before its teaching. The principle then becomes the temple of authority, the house prepared for its indwelling. When secured within, no thing and nothing can enter to defile. Where have we heard that? Know ye not, O man, that ye are the temple of the living God? What then is embodied within the person who is the temple of God? The principle of life, God itself, dwelling within its creation, its temple, called man. This is the understanding that Jesus and all other sages carried as their banner of truth. They were nothing in and of themselves, for they had, as I said before, the requirement, they had cast off the outer personalities and whatnot. And even when we look at people like David, Saul, Solomon, just to name a few, when they gave themselves to the principle, look what the principle, especially, I think was it Saul, I think, when he's in the temple, his eyes have been put out because he revealed the secret of God. And like I tell people all the time, the power of the secret was not in his hair. The power of the secret was in the conversation that he had with God. That's where the power was. And he revealed that to unconditioned consciousness. To conditioned consciousness. It was conditioned negatively. And because he revealed it, his power was lost. Now, the story bears out that his hair grew back, which exemplifies what? It exemplifies that he regained his composure and resubmitted himself to that which was true. And the principle, once more, gave itself to him. As I said, all sages before us have gone through this process. Although visible to the world, they actually lived invisibly in a hiding place. the fortress, the rock of truth. Your imagination should have just formulated a picture within you. Truth is my temple, and I shall abide. See, you're defining the principle now. You're telling your innermost sacred thoughts, beliefs, to line the temple with gold, to cover all things in purity, power, majesty, to clean out the money changers, the thoughts, the negative thoughts, intents, suggestions that would come to rob and separate. For the temple cannot abide divided. Therefore, the strong man, which is the covering that we have allowed, is cast out. We are defining. And this principle is not to be shared like on a one-on-one basis. You can share it with those of like understanding, but you just can't go out and start talking about this to your friends and neighbors because they don't understand. But this principle must be lived, and it must be lived not as though you are performing principles for the sake of performing the principle. You are performing the principle because the principle is the embodiment of who you are. You actually believe this, and therefore you are sowing to the Spirit, and the Spirit will define the revelation of who you are. Man was intended to live joyously in a created world made just for him. Take a picture of that. Man was intended to live joyously in a created world made just for him. The principle was and is to keep him excited just knowing that on it he can depend unerringly with total confidence. And then you say, but what about the problems that come up? Yeah, you're going to have them. You're going to have them. I'm going to have them. We all going to have them. All God's children going to have them. Look around you. It seems as though we've been cast into a world of chaos. And everywhere we look, there is something suggesting that we are not going to make it. That's right. But the principle says what? Hold fast. Hold fast to your confidence. For in due time. Oh, in other words, I'm going to make it. That's right. In other words, I am going to make it. It may seem ugly and it may seem inconvenient, but I'm going to make it. It's like I was telling Miss Clara a while ago, the revelation that I got through Joel Goldsmith, that if we try to make sure we get this thing before the coffin comes and gets us, that's pressure. We need to get that pressure off us because, man, I mean, sometimes I stayed up all night trying to understand and get God, and it doesn't happen. But the revelation that came through Mr. Goldsmith was, well, what about all of those young men that have been sent off to war, 16, 17, 18 years old, who never had an opportunity to seek? And a lot of them died on the battlefield seeking security and not finding it because they did not know that security was there. So once I throw off this pressure cooker that I have on me, that by the time I get to the coffin, I need to understand this or else I don't know. No. He who has begun a good work has purposed. And in another sermon coming up, the statement says, as God waited on Noah, he will wait on you. Just be sincere. The principle was like I said, and is to keep us excited because we know it is ever with us. It was to make us feel good all the time, even when ugly was going on. And when an issue, adversity arises, we have only to remember who we are. That this thing would fade into the great abyss. There's no need to pray, God, remove this cancer. God, remove this high blood pressure. God, if we are the embodiment of truth, of God, the temple, he embodies us, does he not know what things we have need of? We need to, as much as possible, let the principle define itself that we may move on. And as I said, I'm quite sure, most uncomfortable, some of the things, the pains that come, the mental pains, the emotional pain, the physical pains. But all we basically have is to go to a man and hope that we can explain our symptoms, that he might recognize them. I wonder how many people have been misdiagnosed because the doctor thought they were telling him one thing and looked it up and gave them the wrong medicine. Because he has to interpret when you say it's a pain on a scale of 8 and it comes like a searing pain or like a hot pain or like a striking pain, he's got to sit back and go, man, what are they talking about? I am not discouraging anyone from seeking medical help if you feel it's necessary. But I am saying, God says you are the temple, and I will put all of me in you, and I will watch over your affairs. That's how we must approach. This man no longer has to seek, no longer ask, and no longer has to knock, for he has become the principle in expression, and all that the principle represents is at his command. And what is his command? His command is knowing that the temple is full of God the Creator. Although this relationship has been deemed not accomplishable in the earth, one has but to set out individually on his own and prove it not only possible, but absolutely probable to all who seek with an openness of heart. And trust me, although it has occurred in small instances, I have drawn them to me when I least expected. Just knowing that the God had given me a revelation and someone immediately comes and swears up and down, you gave them freedom, and you standing there going, but we were just talking about, no, it's the Father. That person has prayed, and you brought the revelation that calmed them within. In closing, two lovers finding themselves to be one principle, sharing each other's most sacred feelings, seeing each other clearly, for they have truly defined the principle. God bless.